Hello, I'm Alison Cameron, and I was the director of the Mither Kirk project, the excavations at St Nicholas East Kirk in 2005 and 2006. And today I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we found on the excavation. This is the Parson James Gordon's 1661 map of Aberdeen, showing what he called the Great Church. And you can see here the West Church of St Nicholas, which is not within our excavation area and was rebuilt 1755. And then the East Kirk here, as it was in the 17th century, but it was rebuilt in 1837. And then a big fire in 1874 burnt down the East Kirk, and you can see here people fighting the fire. The steeplers came down into the East Kirk, and I think at that time people thought that all the walls were taken down completely. But when we started the dig, one of the first things that we noticed was that the walls seemed to be charred. And this is the south wall of the church here, and you can see this blackening, and we wonder if that is from this fire, and that therefore the lower parts of the walls were not rebuilt, but were reused. Maybe they were in better condition than was thought. This is interesting because at the bottom of the 19th century walls you can see this step, and this is actually the remains of the 15th century church. And again you can see it here, the wall and the foundation of the 15th century church. And this shows that the 19th century church was rebuilt using the 15th century walls as the foundations for the new church, so on the same footprint. This is an interesting image because this trench was being excavated to allow scaffolding to be put up inside the church, to allow us to move around and to remove soil and everything from the dig area. This is fantastic because this person here is about 6 foot tall, and you can see the depth that we've excavated to, getting quite near the bottom of the dig here. So it was an enormous project, 20 by 20 meters in size, and well, about 3 to 4 meters down. The 15th century church, we found quite a number of aspects of architectural elements from this church. This is St Mary's Chapel that I'm just pointing out here, and it's available to go and have a look at on open days. And it was built separately from the 15th century, and then added on to the rest of the church. We found a construction corridor, which I'm going to show you a picture of in a minute, sleeper walls, a window now well down below ground level, but at one time must have been allowing light into that construction corridor, and doors and a staircase here. You can see the scar of the construction corridor here on the wall. It was disturbed by later burials, but it would have allowed access from the higher level here on the right down to the area where St Mary's was being constructed on the left of the image here. This is view fairly near the beginning of the excavation. You can see these two enormous walls, one here and one here, over a metre wide and at least a metre deep, which were the sleeper walls underneath the 15th century church. Now, these would have not been properly visible, but they would have held the pillars which would have held up the roof of the 15th century church. And these had reused walls of the 12th century church, which we'll have a look at in a minute. But all of this reuse of the structures means that there was a lot for us to find, and a lot was retained, that we excavated. This is another view of those two walls, so you can see that there's some areas though where bits have been removed for burials, and you can see some paving on the top here, so presumably just that would have been visible in the original 15th century church. And you can see where some of the pillars had also been sited. This is an accurate and minute description of the East Kirk, 1818 by Logan, and you can see an image here, faint image of St Nicholas. So you can see the 3 aisles, each separated with these pillars, and our walls that I'm talking about are below this level here. St Maccas has the same, so in these churches which were held up by the roof weight on these pillars, they needed these substantial walls underground. We found 2 doors. Now, they were known from the St Mary's Chapel side, but we dug down and excavated them. This is the one on the south side, and this is a fantastic, very early granite working, and each of the stones had a star mason's mark on it. You can see at the bottom here. and these would have marked the number of stones that a mason and his team made. Unfortunately, we don't know who the mason was that used the star on this project. We also found several with a W with a tail, and that's interesting because we found 2 of those on the buttresses in the Carmelite Friary in the Green in Aberdeen. The stairway that we found, these stone stairs, would have taken you down from St Mary's up into the 15th century church. This was as we found them when we uncovered them. We opened up, took a stone out of the blocking and looked through, and we could see the stairs. And you can see that they've been blocked maybe at the Reformation with this brick vaulting, which would have then separated St Mary's from the rest of the East Kirk. And so here you can see St Mary's again. We've got the 2 doors that I just spoke about and the set of stairs, this little window. And we found a wall that had separated the church probably in the late 1600s, and again dividing the church up into different worship areas. Taking apart some of these structures, we found a lot of stonework, thousands of pieces of stone, not all fully studied yet because we found it really difficult to find somewhere to put them all to study them. But this is a wonderful face and hand from the blocking up of the doorway with all the mason's marks. And we had a number of pieces of pillars, so little pillars and decorative pillars. This is one that we took into Drumsile to compare it with the bits of decorative pillars that are existing in the medieval building that survives. We found thousands of objects associated with the later church, and this is a bit of a copper alloy vessel that we wondered if it might be a bit of a bell. St Nicholas is very famous 48 bells in the Carillon at the moment, and we wondered if this might be a bit of one of the later medieval bells. And the burials, Paul Duffy is going to be talking a bit more about the burials on this YouTube channel in another talk. But we had over 1,000 altogether, and the later ones associated with the later church, quite often the coffin wood was very well preserved, so you can see here the outline. The later burials from the 1500s and 1600s had handles and strengtheners on the corners, and you can see some of the bone is very, very well preserved. We had quite a lot of textiles, and Penelope Walton Rogers has done a talk for this YouTube channel, which you can learn more about the textiles. Not many complete examples, but this is 2 examples of hats that we excavated. Wonderful bows here. This is the mid calf, and you can see the bow here on one leg and on another, presumably some sort of knickerbocker style of dress. Very interesting individual buried with hands clasped under here. Unfortunately, when we took the hands apart, there was nothing in them, but this would have been he's a middle-aged man, and he would have been a priest, and Penelope will talk more about the textiles found in his grave. And this was an interesting middle-aged adult female who had osteomalacia, so adult vitamin D deficiency, probably caused by some underlying medical condition. And she was buried with this lead token, so the Virgin Mary with the body of Jesus over her knee, which is a pietà. And there's no known parallel, we haven't found one yet, for this badge to be used in a particular cathedral where people went on pilgrimage. And you wonder if it's possible that this is actually the badge of St Nicholas, and she had come to Aberdeen to be healed, bought that badge, and then of course died and been buried here. There's more research to do on that with pilgrimage specialists. The plan here shows in the pink the 15th century pillars, so that's where bits of the 12th century church have been taken out. But we had a mid and a late 12th century church as well, which again were well preserved because they'd been covered up by other remains. So we had this is the east wall of the mid 12th century church. So you can see the buttresses here, the stone of the wall still standing 3 courses high, of course the graveyard associated with that church. This is buttresses, so very, very well preserved stonework, allowing us to work with people like Richard Fawcett to be able to date some of them. And this is the north wall of the church here. You can see again the stonework and where one of the pillars has taken out quite a lot of the stonework. Associated with the later medieval churches are at least 3 burials of people who had gone to Santiago de Compostela. So this shell in the bottom left was the first one that we found, and it wasn't associated with a burial, but there were 2 pierced holes through it, which would have allowed it to be attached onto clothing. The one on the top left, there were 2 scallop shells found near the head of this individual. Presumably they had been attached onto a hat. And this is one where the little scallop shell is over the thigh and presumably had been attached onto a bag, a leather bag, and the textile has gone but left the bone and the scallop shell. This is the north wall of the church here, and to the north of it there were 2 walls attached on, which we wondered if there may be a sacristy. We couldn't find evidence for the entrance into that through the church because of the later excavation for the 15th century church. But this is it here. It was difficult to photograph under these conditions, but that's one of the walls here and one of the walls here, and you can see inside this small structure. And within this area, we found quite a number of little copper alloy finds, chain, and quite a number of bone finds, including the little flute and pins. So this was quite a finds-rich area, and also piles of pottery. And it looks as though this little building was used latterly as a workshop of some sort or storage, and material was just thrown away and discarded once the room went out of use. And you can see it again, you can see it here on the plan. The semicircular blue walls on the left-hand side of that plan are the earliest structure that we found, and probably the earliest wall standing in Aberdeen. And these are an apse at the east end of a church which dates to the late 11th or early 12th century. You can see inside there's a mortar floor here. There's a big bite been taken out of it by later burials that had cut through this church and disturbed some of it. But the walls themselves are fairly well preserved, so you can see the foundation here of that apse. And you can see the little burials here of 25 small children who were buried radiating out from that apse. So you can see this appear to radiate out from this apse. The burial in the centre here of the apse was in a small stone kist or coffin, and it appeared to maybe have been the most important, or maybe the first burial that took place. The other burials, some of them were in wooden logs, so this is a burnt wooden log. This individual skeleton we actually sent for radiocarbon dating, but unfortunately, because the child had eaten such a lot of fish in their diet, the date wasn't as accurate as it could have been, and so we're wanting to do more research on that and send more for dating to see if we can work out exactly when these children were buried. But we know that they were important because the burials were marked, so there was a couple of stones sort of upright that might have been marking them, and there were also 2 that had mussel shells over the burial. So once the grave had been filled, mussels, which presumably had been eaten, were taken apart, and so each half of the mussel was placed face down around in the grave cut. And all of these things meant that these graves were not intercut by other graves or until much, much later. There's a couple of interesting graves that date to this early period. So you've got the children burial here and a few adults who are probably also associated with this apsidal church. But there are 2 highlighted in black here, where the mid-12th century church, this one here, had been replaced, and these graves had been cut through. And when we started excavating them, this is what we saw. So we had a cut here in the wall foundation here, and we found what we thought were jumbled bones. But when we excavated down, we found legs, pelvis, backbone, and then down at the bottom, the skull, and around the neck of the skull, a copper alloy chain with a lead cross. And so this burial appeared, the skull was in place, and the rest of the body had sort of been concertinaed in. So when this wall was built, the builders had found this burial and sort of concertinaed it up into the head area of the grave, which suggested that between the building of these 2 walls was maybe less than 40 years. The bones, well, the skeleton was still articulated and could be moved in that way. So it's not a huge length of time between the building of these 2 structures. And some really interesting human remains. And Paul Duffy's going to talk, as I said, about a bit more about some of these individuals. But I just wanted to highlight a couple. This is a man who appeared to have been in several battles and who had got at least 5 fatal blade wounds to the head. He's got a little nick on his forehead here. He's got a couple of other blade wounds at the back here. But the awful one here is where a blade came through and took off his top teeth here. And it would be really nice to do a facial reconstruction of his image, which we hope to do in the future. And one that I really like, which is that when in the later period people were wanting to use both of their hands, so they were making fishing nets, mending things, using both hands. Well, this is a man, and he would have clamped a clay pipe between his teeth, held it there for quite a long time, and then presumably the hole got too big and he moved over and he clamped it on the other side. And of course lots of clay pipes associated with the dig as well in all the grave fills. So that's some of the highlights of the excavation. If you want to get in touch, Open Space Trust website, we do Facebook and Twitter, so if you have any questions, get in touch with us, and please have a look at some of the other videos that we've put onto this YouTube channel. Thank you very much.